Hi there, welcome folks. I think people are joining in on the call. Um, Today we're here for the Lunch and Learn, but what do I say? Clinician fears when talking with eating disordered clients. My name is Tyler Colburn. I am the professional development consultant here with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. I am joined here by the Aleo Collective as well. I have Courtenay, Raquel, and Lee, who will introduce themselves a little bit later in the presentation. But we're here to talk today about fears and the roles of social workers in addressing the fears when working with service users who are struggling with eating disorders. Before we get into that, I am going to do a land acknowledgement. And I'd love for you folks to join me in the land acknowledgement as well. So I'm going to post some links in the chat here. I would love to hear from you what land you're on. But also feel free to check in, share your names, pronouns, what motivated you to attend today, and anything else that you want to share. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from Gaudiani, which is colonially known as the Citadel Hill, in Halifax, Parachuuktuk, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the Peace and Friendship Treaty signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. So let us take time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. And to extend beyond that, think critically about the ways settler colonialism constructs our worldview and our assumptions and our beliefs, including around eating disorders. So I'd love to see some people in the chat just letting us know how you're doing, how you're arriving in the land that you're on. When we acknowledge land, it's also helpful for many people, for myself especially, to consider the ways that we as humans are also nature. Through the forces of white supremacy and settler colonialism, it's really easy to become disconnected from this understanding that we are also nature. And so this image on the right here is a cross-section of a tree stump and a fingerprint, kind of drawing to mind the connections or the interconnections and the entanglement between humans and the rest of Mother Earth and nature. And this quote from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, I think really does a great job of summarizing this. It says, understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around. So as we acknowledge the land, let us take a moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in the sacred work. So I'm thinking of land defenders and water protectors here in Mi'kma'ki, across Turtle Island, and also Indigenous peoples throughout the world who are engaged in indigenization, decolonization, and resistance. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. And let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere inside and out. And hopefully, our session today will lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. And I just also want to acknowledge that for folks in Mi'kma'ki, if you're in the Chibuktuk sort of area, or even throughout the province or around the country, wildfires are happening everywhere. So as we think about the land and acknowledging the land and our accountabilities to the lands, whether you're Indigenous or a settler Canadian like myself, just thinking about the impact that's having on people and our cousins in nature and our family and kin in nature and our friends and people who might be impacted by wildfires and holding on to that. And so if you're feeling any grief or hardness around that, just know that many are with you. Reminder as well that we're all treaty people. And so when thinking about that, especially as myself as a settler Canadian, I'm reflecting on like, how does this reflect or connect to the work that I'm doing? How does it guide our work together today and going forward? And of course, for us, we're really drawn to and guided by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions, and specifically around professional regulators and making sure that we're seeking to decolonize our practices and procedures. Alongside the land acknowledgement, but separate and distinct, is our commitment to reparations for people of African descent. Here in Nova Scotia within Mi'kma'ki, we have 52 distinct African Nova Scotian communities. And for us at the college, our commitment includes restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. If you're not familiar with reparations for people of African descent, I encourage you to check out this link at the bottom to our commitment from 2024 and the Emancipation Day. So when we're thinking about reparations for people of African descent, we're considering the folks here in Mi'kmaq, the Black Loyalists, the Maroons, the Southern American Black refugees, and how the legacies of these communities have shaped our cultural and political landscape here in Nova Scotia. So I won't go through the objectives because I know the Aleo Collective is going to be sharing the objectives, but just a reminder that this is formal professional development. Obviously, folks on the call, if you're with the College of Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, pardon me, you probably know this is PD tracking, but just a reminder that we are getting close to renewal season. So make sure you track this as formal professional development for 1 hour. And of course, we're guided by our code of ethics. We've just recently adopted our new code of ethics. They should be on our website later this week or next week, maybe. And all social workers in Nova Scotia who are part of the college will have to attest to committing to these new code of ethics. And so looking at value 1, respecting the dignity and worth of all people. Value 2, promoting social justice. Value 4, valuing human relationships. And then value 7, providing culturally responsive, competent professional services. So this session and all of our sessions are guided by our code of ethics and standards of practice. And so framing for our time together, I want to acknowledge that maybe many folks on this call might have lived experience with eating disorders. I'll say, self-disclosure, something that I've experienced in my own life and many people in my community have experienced. And so I just want to acknowledge that as you come to this session, you're coming with your own expectations, your assumptions, and your beliefs. And you may have, during the session, you might have your expectations uniquely met or 100% aligned, or maybe you won't, and that's okay. So just trying to resist this idea that this session will 100% meet all of your expectations. You also don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but ask you to be open to seeing what happens, so being curious about it. Take responsibility for yourself by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. Eating disorders is a however you're approaching this topic or what your context is, it could be triggering. It could bring up big emotions. So making sure you're taking care of yourself and remaining curious about what you're experiencing in your body and your heart and your mind. It's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. As a webinar, you only have access to chat and Q&A, but just reminding yourselves that you get to decide how you show up in the session today. And then finally, we can all engage in ways that support others. So this is not a place for healing, but healing can happen here. So the Aleo Collective, I'll pass it over to them, but I just want to, this is from their website. They're a group of interdisciplinary mental health practitioners who share similar values and approaches to sustainable recovery from eating disorders or disordered eating behaviors. Whether you're recovering from an eating disorder, questioning whether or not your eating disorder or your eating is disordered, or looking to improve your relationship with food or your body, we're here to help. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to you folks. And a reminder, I'll be here in the session as well if you need me, but I'll turn my camera off for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tyler, for that beautiful introduction and a beautiful framing of our session today. I especially love the idea of, this may or may not meet everyone's expectations. Myself, Courtney, and Raquel, we're all going to introduce ourselves in a second, but we've all dedicated significant portions of our lives to eating disorders, food, body image work. And it's quite a task to boil some of this stuff down into an hour. So we are well aware that today's presentation is just a little taster. And we're going to try to tailor that to you folks as best as possible, while also acknowledging that we've already made these slides. So editing doesn't happen from here on out. So I'll start by introducing myself. So my name's Lee Thomas. I'm a social worker currently based in Amiskwaciwâskahigan, which is the colonial name for Edmonton, Alberta, but spent most of my adult life in Woolastook Territory in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And I am also registered in Nova Scotia as well as Ontario, because that's where people from New Brunswick tend to move to. And I like to follow my clients when that's an option that's available to me. And I'll throw it over to Courtney.
I can go next. All right. Hello, everyone. It is so nice to be here today. Thank you again, Tyler, for the beautiful introduction. My name is Courtney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a registered dietitian, currently based in the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas, presently known as the City of Hamilton in Ontario. I have a lot of connections out east. So even though I'm physically based here right now, kind of a bit more central, Canada, I really am excited to be able to connect with my folks over on the East Coast. I was just there for a little visit. So now I'm back where I normally live. Raquel, would you like to introduce yourself?
And hello, my name is Raquel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm physically located in Jabuktuk, so in Nova Scotia, in Mi'kma'ki. I'm a registered social worker working in private practice. And I think I'll just pass it over to, I think it's Lee that's first, is gonna really get us started here.
Yes, so our objectives for today are to learn, to reflect, and to practice. Not practice actually during today's session, but hopefully find stuff that you can apply to your practice. So learn a little bit about eating disorders versus disordered eating and kind of what we're working with. Again, depending on your level of knowledge and what area you work in, this might be like extremely old news, or this might be super new. And because social work is such a wonderfully broad field, where people are coming into it with different levels of knowledge here. We are going to ask some self-reflection questions for you to reflect on your own relationship to this topic and how it could impact your practice, because it wouldn't be a social work presentation without asking you to do some self-reflection. And then we are going to end with some real world examples of ideally things to say and not to say. These are just kind of structures from which to work. They are not like prescriptions of this is exactly the right way to do it. But we also wanted people to not feel like they left with a bunch of problems and no solutions. So we are hopefully, fingers crossed, we're chatty people, but we're going to try to save some time as well for questions at the end. And if you have questions during, we super encourage you to ask them. If we're not able to get to them today, you can always send us an email. We're pretty accessible people, and we definitely want to support other people in supporting their clients as best they can. With that in mind, we have a poll that we're going to launch, which is us asking what area of social work do you primarily work in? Like I mentioned, we already made these slides. We can't change them now. But we're hoping that the verbal portion of what we do, we might be able to tailor a little bit to who's in the room based on responses right now. I see that it might be a fairly even spread.
Listeners are coming into just on the reflection piece on the previous slide. There's going to be a couple different ways that we're helping to facilitate that today, that reflection piece. One of them of which some of them will be kind of like private self-reflection prompts. And so I'd really encourage you to actually get like a piece of paper, a notebook, whatever, a pen, and would really encourage and invite you to write down some of those responses to some of those prompts that are going to come up.
Okay, and based on the poll results, it seems like the majority of people are in mental health and addictions, but look, I say the majority, the biggest number that is in mental health and addictions, but it is a very widespread, which is great and a little bit what we expected. So again, depending on kind of how clinical your work is, how clinical your background is, some of the stuff you might feel super comfortable with and be a little bit ready for more complicated questions, which is great. And some of this might feel totally new or harder to apply in your area. In which case, feel free to ask us how we might be able to apply it for you, because that's part of the brainstorming that we're here for. So as always, lovely to see that we have so many wonderful social workers in so many wonderful different well-needed areas. We're heading into self-reflection before we even give you any information. And so we have 3 self-reflection questions for you. Like Raquel said, we encourage you to really consider these questions, write down your answers, even just like jot them down for yourself. We're going to go through them a little bit quickly by virtue of the time that we have. So our first one is, how might eating disorders and disordered eating show up in your area of social work? Depending on what your area of social work is, you might be like, this is totally relevant. I already know that I have clients who are navigating this. It might feel like it's less relevant to your area, in which case I really encourage you to think a bit about how this might be showing up in your work. The next question, and it's a big question, is what do you think your role is? And this is also going to be super dependent on maybe what your job title and actual role is, but also thinking about what do you think your role is in your community, in your place of employment, in the world, in terms of navigating eating disorders, not just as a clinical issue, which is most of our focus today, but also as a social issue and a social justice issue. As a reminder, people do also have access to these slides. So if you're like panicking, writing down these questions so you can thoroughly do self-reflection, it's okay. You have access to them. So. And our third question, and this is one that we're going to give you an extra 30 seconds to really think about and write down, is what fears come up for you when you think about working with a client who has an eating disorder in your capacity, in your role? They might be worries about your client's well-being. They might be worries about your what your role even is. They might be worries about your scope of practice or how other people are going to respond or what to say or what not to say. What worries come up? What fears come up? We're aware that this is a vulnerable question, so I'm going to frame it a little bit for our next slide, because we would really love for you to share what some of those fears are. And the way that I'm going to frame it here is, what fears do you think someone else might have? Because if we're asking you to share exactly your fears in here, that feels like it might be a bit vulnerable for a professional setting. But if you could think about what fears might a social worker have when it comes to working with clients who have eating disorders, if you could pop some of those in the chat. And I think that's our next slide. So we do have it framed as what fears come up for you, but what fears do you think a social worker might have? What fears do you think might come up for one of your colleagues or one of your coworkers? What fears have you heard other clinicians have around working with clients with eating? Yes, choosing safe wording, avoiding triggers, two big fears that people have. I mean, I'm trying to remember for this specific presentation if we called it "But What Do I Say?" That was the original name for this presentation, is "But What Do I Say?" Because that was the big thing that we heard. Not knowing enough. Yeah. We gave ourselves a little pep talk prior to this presentation where we were like, we can't tell everyone everything they should have learned in grad school, because most of us didn't learn anything about eating disorders during grad school or our undergrad. Fear missing it through trauma work. Yes. Eating disorders are medical conditions and things can change quickly. Definitely. How to safely bring up concerns. 100%. These are all fears that we hear from a lot of clinicians. Yeah. So thank you so much, folks, for naming these, and you can continue to put some of them in the chat. Yeah, clients not being ready to discuss or make changes around eating disorder behaviors, the overlap with neurodivergence, lack of resources, 100%. I know that my time is up, so I'm going to pass it over to Raquel, who's going to talk about some statistics, but these are, I lied, I have a poll that I'm going to do before that. So.
Sorry, I laughed and forgot my mic was on.
Yes, so definitely you're not alone in these fears. I'm sure there are lots of other clinicians who are seeing this and going like, yes, absolutely. There's 80 people on this call. Like, you are not the person who has this concern. We're going into poll number 2, not poll number 3. If poll number 3 has popped up, pretend you don't see it.
How do I end it? Okay, I ended it. Sorry.
So poll 2 is just about what is your current confidence level when it comes to talking with someone who has an eating disorder. We're not going to ask you to share this one in the chat. All the polls are anonymous, but this just gives us a sense of not only what you think your fears or other people's fears might be, but also how confident do you feel in navigating them? We're kind of balancing these two pieces, both kind of competence and confidence. And I accidentally X'd out of that poll, Raquel, so I'm going to let you let me know when it's done, and then you can take it away into the next section.
As that's coming in, actually, I can start. Though most people have completed it. I'm going to share a few stats, a little bit of like eating disorder 101. Keep in mind, eating disorders are really under-researched and really underfunded, at least that we know of in Canada. So we actually don't really know very much when it comes to like an accurate prevalence rate. But from the research information that we do have, nearly 2 million Canadians have an eating disorder. The majority of that number comes from research that's almost a decade old, federal statistical and research data. So even if we take that same like about 2 million from 2016, at least when it was reported, so probably even earlier than that, taking into account today's current Canadian population, that's a prevalence rate of about 4.8%. So we can expect it's much higher than that actually, which is pretty significant. It is above the international prevalence rate, which tends to range between 2.2% and 4.6%. So it's significant, and it's a lot more common than we might think it is. Most people with eating disorders, about 90%, again, this is research that's almost 10 years old, about 90% of folks with eating disorders don't receive appropriate treatment or support. So that's pretty significant as well. Eating disorders have the second highest psychiatric mortality rate behind the opioid crisis. So eating disorders can be quite serious. They can be deadly, particularly anorexia nervosa has the highest eating disorder mortality rate. And I'll just pause to look at the confidence poll. So about 75% of people completed that. And we got it's split between the most for not very confident, somewhat confident. So glad to have you here. Thanks for being here. And then our next one here. The thing that really worries me as a eating disorder therapist, one of the many things, is especially how food insecurity is becoming more and more of a really significant issue for a lot of people, for the general population. This is some national stats and information, but as far as Nova Scotia, many of you here probably are aware that food insecurity is a huge problem in our province, particularly in more recent years, and how much that has shot up, especially exacerbated by COVID. Nova Scotia is the most food insecure Canadian province. So I don't have the stat rate in front of me, but I think it's 28.9% of individuals are food insecure in Nova Scotia, 22% of households in Nova Scotia. And like I mentioned, eating disorders in general, very under-researched, very underfunded in Canada. And so then, of course, we have even fewer, even less information and research when we look at, well, what impact does food insecurity, that kind of food scarcity, have in the role of eating disorders? And the little that we have shows hey, it looks like it's a risk factor, which, isn't surprising to me, at least. So it's really concerning when we look at how many people are food insecure, period, in Canada, but here locally in our province. And the rate of eating disorders is just it's bad news bears, to put it lightly. The vast majority of people with an eating disorder are not medically underweight. We really tend to focus really on the weight of it all, and the reality is most people with eating disorders are considered medically a healthy or normal weight, or even above or more than that. And I just want to pause because I think there is a question. I thought I saw a hand up. View, how do I do that?
Raquel, I think for now we're putting questions in the chat and we're saving raised hands questions for the end, just timing wise.
Oh, okay. So you may have heard a couple different terms going around, disordered eating, eating disorder. We kind of use both a lot of the time to kind of clarify what that means. Are they different? An eating disorder is a diagnosable mental health disorder in the DSM. So technically categorized as feeding and eating disorders, that's the category. And so there's a number of different diagnosable eating disorders in the DSM. These aren't all of them, but these are some of them. You've probably heard of anorexia, of bulimia, of binge eating disorder, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. Disordered eating, it's not a diagnosis, it's more of an umbrella term that describes a broader range of behaviors and eating patterns that like don't fit diagnostic criteria. And what's really tricky about disordered eating and, you know, kind of, I guess, subclinical eating disorders is that because of the world that we live in, like the diet culture of it all, and the really like pervasive like discourses that we have around health, around bodies, around food and eating. There's like a whole realm and area here of disordered eating that is kind of like normalized diet culture. And so eating disorders can kind of not only go undetected, but can really thrive because some of those behaviors can actually be like applauded and praised as like this person being like really healthy. And a lot of assumptions that we might make about someone's health based on their body or their weight or their food and eating choices. So here's another poll, a pop quiz. What is the most common type of eating disorder? What do you think that might be? I've got to like relaunch it because I accidentally launched it too early. And we've just included the three that, you know, we tend to kind of know about or talk about the most. See what comes in there. Yeah, I just want to read a couple comments as those are coming in. It's so important to be mindful of the way we talk about food and our bodies in front of others, even at the lunch table. Oh my gosh, yes. One of the things I really don't miss about like working like in a physical office anymore. I don't have to I don't have to hear that stuff anymore. But that is so hard. It's something that a lot of people connect on, and it can be difficult to like withstand the diet talk sometimes. So I'll stop the poll now and I'll share that. I think some people know more than maybe they realized. So the most common type of eating disorder is binge eating disorder, which is kind of interesting because it's technically a new eating disorder. It was added to the most recent revision of the DSM-5 back in 2009. Anorexia, at least of these three, anorexia nervosa is the least common eating disorder. So binge eating disorder comprises about 50% of all eating disorders. So it's pretty significant. And this is me,
Oh.
right? Yeah, this is me. No?
We're passing
Okay,
it on at this point, but we will come back to you, Raquel.
great.
All right. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone who answered that poll. I agree that like maybe some of you folks here know a little bit more than what you had thought. But yeah, I just typed in the chat like 50% approximately of eating disorders are binge eating disorder. It's the stuff that always surprises my clients. Like they'll come to me, and again, I'm a dietitian, so people come to me like, "Oh, but Courtney, I'm not super skinny, or like I don't look like I have anorexia. How can I have an eating disorder?" And when we start to explain and look at some of this literature and research we have, it's like, oh, wow, like their eyes kind of open up of like, oh my gosh, like realizing I'm not alone. And like this is a complicated thing. This isn't, you know, my fault. And there's obviously a lot of conversation that goes with that too. So all that to say, let's do another little self-reflection together. All right. And if you want to pull out that pen and paper, blank Word doc, something, or just kind of sit back, we'll take a few moments here. So my first question for you all is, how has your relationship with food and your body influenced how you view and work with clients as a social worker? I'm just taking a moment here, thinking about your own relationship with food and body. How might that be influencing your work? I think just for time's sake, we'll move on to our next question. Again, this will all be available for you after for deeper reflection if you want to. Our next question here is, have you ever made assumptions about a person's health or behaviors based on their weight? How could this affect your care? So thinking about any assumptions that maybe you might have made, any of those biases that might have come up based on someone's weight, and how could this affect your care? I'll also say here too, just inviting a lot of curiosity and compassion as we're exploring these big themes, these big questions. We're not here to judge or judge ourselves, but rather get curious. You can go to that next slide, Raquel. Thanks. Our last reflection question for now is, how do you interact with people in larger bodies? Do you notice any differences in how you approach folks in smaller bodies versus larger bodies? Again, bringing in that sense of curiosity. How do you interact with folks in larger bodies? So we'll pause with that self-reflection for now. I'm sure there's a lot probably coming up for folks. And again, like these might be helpful questions to take with your journal after our session today. But Raquel, let's go to the next slide here. We've got a photo. We have got a scene where we're driving. I don't know, this is downtown Toronto. I don't know. We're in a city. We're driving. Conditions aren't great. And you're on your way to go meet a friend for dinner, and things are kind of messy outside, and suddenly you hit a patch of black ice, you bump into the car next to you. Physically, you're fine, but your heart is beating, you're shaken. Oh my goodness, you just got into a small car accident. Once you've kind of assessed the situation, you've done the insurance thing, you call your friend to let them know, like, you're going to be late or like you can't make it anymore. You let them know what happened. I want you to think, what would you not want the response to be? We can go to the next slide here where we've got that prompt, Raquel. Thank you. So what kind of response would you not want to hear in this scenario? You've just been in a fender bender, you're shaken, you call your friend. What kind of response would you not want to hear in this scenario? Were you speeding? You probably caused it. Oh my goodness. Yep. Why would you do that? Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's not helpful. Or someone saying it could have been worse, or at least you're okay. You weren't paying attention. Like a lot of blame, right? A lot of blame on the individual, a lot of judgment. Yeah, those are like not helpful things, right? No one wants to hear that after you've just gotten in an accident, you're shaken, right? Oh my gosh. Oh, you've gotten into so many accidents. Oh, I'm waiting for you. I'm hungry. Oh my goodness. Yeah, were you on your phone? Right? None of these are really helpful responses, right? So I just kind of want you to keep this in mind, right? Like that feeling that you're kind of getting right now that's probably bubbling up for you as you're like, oh, imagining like you're in this vulnerable state and your friends like, oh my gosh, you weren't paying attention, or like whatever they're saying. Like that's not really helpful, right? So we're going to kind of take that feeling and kind of slip that into the shoes of some of our clients now, or individuals that we might be interacting with when we're in our, social worker role or role as a clinician. And we're going to start to look a little bit more now at some common interactions, what to say, what not to say. Again, we're not here to judge. And if you notice there's something that comes up that's like, oh my gosh, I've said that before, you're not a terrible person. No, we're figuring this out together, and we're all learning and unlearning all the time. And hopefully there's some examples and some ideas here that might feel really practical and applicable for you as you move about the world and are interacting with folks with eating disorders, whether you know it or not. All right, so let's go to the next slide here and get into some of our examples.
Yeah, so we're heading into our more specific examples. Like Courtney said, these are all things that it's possible that we've said at different points in our career. It's possible that we've heard clients say other therapists have said. It's possible that therapists have said this to us as clients. So recognizing that if you have said some of these things, or if you're like, that seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to say, that's super fair. If you already knew all of this stuff, this would be a huge waste of your time. So it's okay if some of this feels, yeah, like challenging. So this one, I see you've lost weight. You look great. As a sidebar, we're also talking about responses you can have or things you're saying to clients in your professional role. But if we go into the next slide, because I was like, this seems like a perfectly innocuous thing for lots of people. But weight loss is not inherently a good thing. And we could do a whole other presentation about that, but it's just, you're just gonna have to take our word for it right now. So being able to say, if you're in a role where this is a reasonable thing for you to be commenting on, I noticed there's been a recent shift in your weight. Are you open to talking more about how this change happened? Is it that they don't have ready access to food? Is it that they are going through chemo treatment? Is it that they're really depressed? Is it that they have an eating disorder? What I am gonna say with other external relationships, if this is maybe a coworker you're really close with, this also might want to be a conversation that you have. If this is like a random cashier that you see at the grocery store, this might want to be something that you say nothing about and simply not comment on other people's bodies. So sort of gauging where your relationship with a person is. That's not a healthy thing to eat. Again, this is one of those things where this might be coming up in your conversations with clients, or this might be coming up in your conversations with coworkers. So gauging where your relationship with this person is, instead of commenting on other people's food choices. Recognizing, again, depending on what the relationship is, being able to acknowledge you're doing the best to feed yourself and your family. Any food is better than no food. What's accessing food look like for you right now? One of the ways that structural oppressions can worm their way into our practice is by making the assumption that we know what's going on in people's lives. And conversations I have with clients a lot of the time, and I'm sure Courtney has with clients even more than I do, is the idea of fed is best, right? All food has value and has nutritional value. And people can be really judgmental about other people's food choices and about their own. And so we really want to acknowledge that eating enough is usually an important first step, and we don't want to be judgmental about how that's happening. If someone is talking about concerns that they have around their body, brushing it off, you're just going through a phase. Everyone feels insecure about their body sometimes. A lot of these things that we're saying are really well intentioned because we kind of want to reassure people that maybe it's okay that they're thinking these things, or we want to normalize stuff. But clients can really experience this as being very invalidating. It might have been really scary for them to call you and tell you about their fender bender. And if you're sort of like, fender benders are not a big deal, why are you being such a baby about this? They're going to experience that very differently. So something you could say instead might be, I imagine what you're going through is really difficult. Thank you for telling me. Really acknowledging the bravery that it takes for them to open up about any degree of body insecurity. And taking these things seriously when we hear them. Sometimes when people make a throwaway comment about like, well, everyone hates their body, haha. Being able to really pause and go like, that sounds hard. Can you talk to me more about that? And last one for me, I think, before I throw it over to Courtney. Courtney, I saw you unmute. Is this one yours?
You go for it.
Saying to people, don't worry, you're not fat, or you're a normal weight, or you won't get fat if you're trying to reassure them about accessing help. This really reinforces the idea that fat is a bad thing to be. And depending on how immersed you are in this sort of world, that might feel like, yes, I'm glad they're highlighting that, or it might feel like, what do you mean? Of course, fat is a bad thing to be. And so if this feels like a totally new concept for you, we super encourage you to do a little bit more reading about it. We're going to put some resources later. But either way, really recognizing that we can be enforcing some really toxic things by reassuring people that they're not fat or that they won't get fat. So something we can say instead is, Oh, we wrote a big one for this. I can imagine the idea of gaining weight feels really scary for you. So really wanting to validate that. They're also not bad for not wanting to gain weight, but being like, it makes sense that this is scary for you. And it makes sense given how focused our society and our healthcare system is on weight loss and congratulating and reinforcing thin bodies. No matter what your body size is, you're deserving and worthy of recovery. Like Courtney mentioned earlier today, a lot of clients are like, well, I'm not thin. I don't have an eating disorder. And for us to be able to really reinforce that you don't have to be thin in order for this to be a big problem in your life.
Absolutely. I'll just add to that as well. Like oftentimes within like, I guess like traditional eating disorder treatment, there's this idea or like still referencing quite heavily on the BMI and this idea of like, well, you're going to recover to exactly this weight and that will be it. When reality is there's a lot of people that might actually recover and maybe even have their entire eating disorder experience in a fat body, in a larger body, and that's okay. There's a whole lot more here to unpack, as Lee mentioned, especially if this kind of idea of like, wait, you're like fat isn't bad. Like if that's new for you, that's okay. Like we are going to give some more resources to help folks explore this a little bit more too. All right, let's go to the next example here. You don't look like you have an eating disorder. This one I've heard far too many times from my clients, them being told this by family members, by doctors, by therapists. And reality is it's more complicated. There's no one look for an eating disorder. Eating disorders do not discriminate with body size or race or gender. Let's look at what our response might be instead. That might be more helpful. Eating disorders can affect anyone, any age, any gender, any body size. Your experience is valid. Raquel mentioned earlier how kind of like the diagnosis of an eating disorder is something based in the DSM. And yes, well, there are limitations and it's not fully capturing the lived and living experiences of folks with eating disorders. We do recognize that like there are some people are really trying to do work to challenge the idea of BMI and some of those limitations, body mass index, for anyone who doesn't know that acronym I'm throwing around. Thank you, Raquel. And just trying to like help educate like not only us as clinicians and providers, but also clients and individuals that like, yeah, eating disorders truly can affect people of all different shapes and sizes. It's not just limited to folks in certain types of bodies or very thin or emaciated bodies. Honestly, most of my clients that I support as an eating disorder dietitian are in like straight size bodies or larger bodies. The vast majority of them are, and might not quote unquote look like they have an eating disorder. And that, you know, I want to still acknowledge and validate their experience. Let's go to the next slide now.
I just want to quickly highlight too some resources, like Lee's mentioned, like the very flawed BMI, like some like additional things around that. Sabrina Strings, really incredible book she wrote, a historian, Fearing the Black Body, looking at the racial origins of fat phobia. So just wanted to highlight that.
Awesome. Yeah, fantastic book. Another example here of maybe not the most helpful thing to say is, I wish I had your self-control. Kind of going back to one of the examples Leah shared earlier, like we don't actually know why someone might be losing weight or in the body that they're in, but saying something like, I wish I had your self-control, it's really complicated. And often for someone who's struggling with their relationship to food and body is not a helpful thing for them to hear. But instead, maybe we can say something like, get Raquel to hit the next slide here. It seems like eating is difficult for you. Let's work together to come up with a plan that makes sense for where you're at now. I'll also mention here that a lot of individuals listening to this might be like, oh, well, what is that plan? Like, I don't know where to go next. Like, that's okay. That's okay too. We can learn, and we can also lean on our colleagues, reach out for help, like continuing education, consultation, like that's where we can work together. We're going to talk more about ways to expand on this so that you can feel a bit more confident with knowing what to do next when these themes do come up for individuals. It is not on you to know it all. But rather like get curious, right, about what's going on, Let's shift some of the ways that we're responding. Let's acknowledge that, yeah, maybe food is really difficult for this person. I wonder why that might be. Can we open up a conversation? What might be the next steps to that plan?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're trying to highlight here too is like not even necessarily like this is what you say instead, but more of like demonstrating the like, let's pause and like check our assumptions. Let's check our like maybe on what are our unconscious biases around this, looking at diet culture as a system of power and how that relates to our work in social justice and as social workers. You know, what privileges might we have access to when it comes to body size and weight? In what ways might we be experiencing like oppression because of our body size, weight, these kinds of things, and of pausing, noticing, and like critiquing these systems of power, I think is kind of like the one of the main things we're trying to demonstrate here.
Another phrase I've heard way too many times, and often well-meaning, is just eat. And really, well, it's a lot more complicated than that. So to Raquel's point, like maybe this could be an opportunity if someone's sharing that there's some struggles with eating or they're not eating enough, maybe responding with something like, tell me more about what challenges are coming up for you with eating. Are there any worries about being able to afford food, getting access to food, right? Opening up the conversation here. The last example here is saying nothing when something comes up about eating disorder stuff or challenges with the relationship to food and body, and the clinician says nothing. And maybe that's out of fear of saying the wrong thing. Maybe you say nothing because you truly don't know what to say next. Maybe it's because you don't see a concern. What you could try saying instead is, hey, I'm concerned about your eating. I'm wondering if we can explore your relationship with food a bit more together. Again, it's okay if you don't have the answers or know exactly what to do next, but holding space for that, being able to explore and acknowledging that there's a challenge here for this individual. I wonder what else is going on here. Pass it over to you, Raquel.
It's me. So yeah, just a couple of things to kind of highlight options for like what to do next. I'm gonna kind of put them all up on the screen here. But the thing I really want to highlight is like learn as much as you can about eating disorders and about like adjacent kind of areas like related to this. So like learning about fat liberation work and what that looks like, learning about like diet culture as a system of power, a system of oppression. I'm gonna paste a few resources to kind of like get you started around this. I actually decided to just add what I think is a pretty great definition of what is diet culture by Christy Harrison. So I'm gonna add that in as well. Courtney is also going to share a little bit more in a moment about what we do and how you can continue in your own professional development or continuing education around these topics as far as what we offer through Aleo and the kind of work that we do. But listening, validating your clients, referring to specialists or seeking out consultation or support if needed. And I want to invite you to take that pen, paper, that blank document maybe that you have up, although probably not blank anymore, I'm guessing. And want to invite you to reflect on this question of what is one thing I want to take away from today's session and apply in my social work practice. Just noticing like what's coming up for you and just allowing that to come out on the page or on your screen as you type or write that. And this is private. We won't ask you to share this specific response.
And I'll just share a little bit more about some of the offerings that we have as the Aleo Collective, which again is made up of myself, Raquel, and Lee. And we offer free monthly webinars. We took a little summer break from our free webinars. They're always topics related to food, body stuff. often geared towards individuals struggling, working on their healing and recovery journey, and sometimes also for clinicians. We have groups for both providers for consultation, as well as clients, body image groups, and similar groups like that. We have a variety of other free online resources like blog posts, our Instagram page, if you want to follow along. We try to make things accessible and offer an array of options here. And the three of us also do each run our own private practices, supporting individuals in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Ontario. Lee also does Alberta. We have a specific group coming up that we wanted to share with you folks as well. So myself and Lee, as the dietitian social worker combo here, are offering a confident and competent clinician consultation group for anyone who wants more of that kind of deeper focused consultation in a very small group setting to enhance their eating disorder skill set. It's going to be starting in September. We've got a few details on here, and I'm just going to drop a link in the chat as well. All these links will be summarized and sent to you after, but just letting folks know if this group, it is a paid group. If it's something that is interesting for you or that you would like to tap into, great. We also have a free version, a little taster version coming up next week. And that will also be going out, our little free consultation. We'll be sharing that link. Thank you, Lee, so much. I didn't have that one posted there, so that's in the chat as well. Okay, we have a bit of time for questions before we pass it back to Tyler. How would we like to proceed from here?
I do want to highlight, maybe you folks already saw it, but there was a question there from Jessica. How can we best support patients who are ambivalent or resistant to treatment?
I'd love to jump in on this one if you want. Which it's super great question, and also we will do our best. It's a big question, so I'm like, we'll do our best to give another little taste of an answer here. I think the big thing with people who are ambivalent about treatment, because ambivalence is super, super normal, especially when it comes to eating disorders, is being able to meet people where they're at, which is like a little bit of a cliche answer, but it's kind of a cliche for a reason. There's been amazing work around harm reduction done in the substance use world, and we're really able to recognize that like harm reduction helps keep people alive until they're ready for the next stage. We haven't seen that same embrace of it in the eating disorder world, but it's a big part of the work that like we do at the Aleo Collective, is recognizing that anyone who's willing to access treatment in any way, we want to be able to meet them where they're at. And sometimes that means helping people understand safer ways of purging or safer ways of laxative use. It's not that we want them to keep purging or want them to keep using laxatives, but if we can reduce the amount of harm that's happening to them while we're building this rapport with them so they are more willing to access services, and ideally that their brain is getting a little bit more nourished, I think that's a really important place to start.
Definitely.
Yeah, we on that.
I know there was a question too about FBT. It looks like Lee provided an answer for that. FBT, family-based treatment, tends to be what's used for like pediatric eating disorders, children and youth. Change Creates Change is a private center that provides virtual services, including to Nova Scotia, and they do tend to work with quite a few youth and children. There is FBT options through public health as well. I know that Brianne Hopkins, who's a dietitian that works in private practice, I know that she does a lot of work in kind of helping support families and children, kind of in preparation maybe for FBT treatment through like public health, and kind of like what to expect, and kind of helping with interim support, bridging that gap, as like sometimes she does the some individual treatment informed by some of that as well, but she might be a helpful contact to have. I don't know if there were any other questions that came in. It's hard to keep up. There's like a lot of things in the chat.
Yeah, there's one I saw that's how can we best support clients who are food insecure but pursuing recovery?
Yeah, we talked quite a bit about food insecurity today, or acknowledging the prevalence. especially in Nova Scotia, which, as Raquel said, Nova Scotia is one of the highest rates out of the Canadian provinces. So food insecurity, we know there is a link there with eating disorders. And when someone, is, struggling with an eating disorder, pursuing recovery, and they also have food insecurity, meeting them where they're at best we can. As a dietitian, I mentioned this earlier, like I frequently say any food is better than no food. We're not going for, like the fancy like Canada's food guide, like which may or may not actually be accessible for a lot of individuals, but rather, okay, what is accessible? Where can we try to access a bit more food to try to support regular adequate eating first and foremost, really meeting that person where they're at. It's not straightforward at all. I know that. And, acknowledging that it's complicated. And I'm not sure, Raquel, if you wanted to jump in here. I know you got a lot.
Well, I think if this kind of runs in tandem with like harm reduction work as well. And like that's something that I don't really see happening, like being talked about a lot in like, food secure or like food insecurity based organizations, or even with like food banks and stuff. Like we don't tend to like give people information around how to reduce some of the harms that might be associated with like restrictive eating behaviors, whether it's because there's like an excessive fear of weight gain, or whether it's because there's not enough food in the cupboard because it's so effing expensive, and like food insecurity. So like it means sometimes getting creative. Like I'm thinking an example that comes up off the top of my head, and like, what liquid nutrition options might be available. And like I'm thinking of an example of like sometimes if folks have access to like non-insured health benefits for like First Nations folks, like sometimes there can be um, financial support they can get for like nutrition supplements, like Ensure, Boost, like those kinds of things, with support of a dietitian, just to kind of use that as an example. But I do think it runs in tandem with a lot of the harm reduction work as well. But I know, Tyler, you have like conclusion stuff that you need to do, right?
I do. I'll share my screen, but there is a question that came in through the Q&A that says, what often initiates a person having an eating disorder? So I'll give you a second to reflect on that, but I do want to share my screen. And I know it's a big question as well, but it's such an important one. And I just encourage folks, I did put in the chat a little bit earlier, a checkout prompt. And so if you have time and space and you want to share with everyone, what are you taking away from this session today, and what will you apply in your practice? That was one of those self-reflection questions that was also offered. And if you want to share anything else in the chat to help close out the session for you. And then, of course, I want to point to our upcoming events. That we have way too many things happening in September all of a sudden, which is surprising, but lovely. I'm so grateful. But we have lots of content coming up and sessions. So lots of communities of practice for folks. We also have 2 sessions around suicidology and suicide prevention for World Suicide Prevention Day, pardon me. We have a session coming up on September 2nd with Brenda Gear, who's on the call, about decolonizing mental health. Monday, we have one, Understanding Social Work Burnout, with Amy Pinell, or the Sensitive Social Worker. But lots of things coming up, so please do look at our Eventbrite and our newsletter for the upcoming events. And just massive kudos to Raquel, Courtney, and Lee for offering the session. It was really great. And I as a facilitator, was also like taking notes about how I can do this differently in my own practice. So great job. It was really wonderful to be able to do this. And I want to say again, kudos to Raquel for like coming forward to me with this idea and working on this and bringing the Aleo Collective into this space. So wonderful work. And but I'll pass it over to you folks again, and I'll stop sharing if you feel you have time or space to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just typing a response, and I can say a response instead for this big question. What often initiates a person having an eating disorder? So something that comes to mind is a thing that I've learned or heard of quite a bit in my training, is that genetics load the gun, environment pulls the trigger. Not always the most appropriate saying, but the point being that there is a large genetic component to eating disorders, and there are so many environmental factors as well, including diet culture, trauma, access to food, like so much more here. So eating disorders are very complex brain-based illnesses that can negatively impact us, like mentally, emotionally, physically. Like there's so much there, right? So it's not often like one thing that initiates an eating disorder. And honestly, most of my clients say it started well before they were even aware, or in childhood, and kind of evolves over time. So, kind of having these conversations and getting more educated and curious, and listening to the lived and living experiences of our clients can help us have a better understanding to meet them where they're at.
And especially to like that big environmental component of like what might seem like an innocuous like diet because I'm like trying to like lose a couple pounds and be healthier or whatever, that we see that when people go on diets, that their risk for developing like a eating disorder or severe eating disorder that goes up. And like when this is happening in childhood, especially when young kids are noting their difference body wise, weight wise, when it comes to other kids and what kind of other influencing factors or external factors are around that. When we see kids like going on diets trying to lose weight, that's a really significant risk factor for the eating disorder.
Well, folks, we are at 1:01, and so I know some people are already dropping off the call, but I'm really grateful for Courtney, Raquel, and Lee again for being here today, and grateful for I think we had 82 people at our max on the call today, so really grateful for folks showing up. Reminder, this is being recorded, so it will be posted on YouTube probably by mid-September. But if you're curious about this topic and want to know more, let us know. Fill out the evaluation survey, and there's a question there around what other PD opportunities you'd like to see. I'd love to work with these three again. But yeah, it's just been a great day and a great session, and I hope everyone has something to look forward to and are staying cool, dry, and safe.
And thank you so much, Tyler, for being a wonderful host.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks.